Hello, and welcome to our study of progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. So, as always, kindly generate the intention to establish all sentient beings, all our mothers and fathers, on the level of perfect enlightenment. So we're presently then reaching the culmination of our study, which is the vision of what we call greater Madhyamaka. And this is sometimes referred to as Shentong Madhyamaka. And the reason why we call it greater Madhyamaka is because it's really the Madhyamaka that fully, well, it fully embraces the luminosity of wisdom. So a lot of Madhyamaka is really about us letting go of our dogmas, our ideas, and however subtle they are, we need to, essentially, you could say the very nature of our unenlightenment is that we're grasping onto something. And then you could say Madhyamaka is gradually introducing the very absence of anything we can grasp onto. But greater Madhyamaka, on the foundation of that, they recognize, and you could say implicit in the Shentong or the greater Madhyamaka view, is the understanding of luminosity. There's no difference in the degree to which the Shentong and the Greater Madhyamikas, same thing by the way, Shentong Madhyamaka, Greater Madhyamaka, same thing. Also here, as you can see, Yogacarya Madhyamaka. There's no difference in the way in which they establish emptiness, that which cannot be, you could say, that the very freedom from conceptual constructs. But there is very much an experiential dimension that operates with this quality of the luminous awareness, wisdom. And that is what makes, you could say, this is not just about the absence of conceptual constructs, but also the luminous presence of all the qualities of enlightenment. So in this way, you could say the whole journey we've taken here in terms of emptiness, it culminates in that which is the spontaneous qualities, the sublime aspects of emptiness. So that's why we could even say emptiness becomes slightly misleading. And that's why Jakob Trungpa also makes a point about how when we come to the Vajrayana, to Tantra, then we don't talk so much about shunyata, but we talk a lot about luminosity. Understanding the nature of reality when it's no longer filtered by obscuration, by our ego, by the cognitive and emotional and so forth obscurations, then the nature of reality is luminous. But the very reason why we can recognize such a nature is due to the absence of any grasping, any duality. But once that's there, yes, then there are all the qualities of enlightenment, as we would know, of course, this is, you say, what makes enlightenment so attractive. This is what makes the sage so attractive. All these, you say, qualities, not just qualities for his or her own sake, but also the qualities that manifest in the vision of others. You could say the form manifestations, the expressions, the rupakaya, we could say. So, Shentong, emptiness of other. This stage could also be called Yogacarya Madhyamaka or Great Madhyamaka. As was mentioned in the last section, many Shentong masters criticize the Prasangika Madhyamikas for their claim that they do not hold any views. This is what is so absolutely wonderful about the Prasangika Madhyamaka, is that they, in principle, don't hold views. Their entire project, their methodology is not making any statement, not making any assertion, and just showing that any attempt to establish any kind of existence is flawed. That's all they do. So, in principle, they do not hold any views. But it is tricky, isn't it? Because yes, you would definitely want to not hold any views and so forth. But as a methodology, as a path, it's tricky. And that's where those who criticize the Prasangika Madhyamika for not holding any views, they then say, as Khenpo says, in the opinion of these masters, Prasangikas just dodge the issue because they refute everyone else's views and then avoid the refutation of their own views by claiming not to have any. And the truth of the matter is, Prasangika Madhyamikas, well, they probably might have an opinion or two. Of course, you say the sage doesn't have an opinion or two, and the genuine Prasangikas doesn't have a view, if you like. But at the same time, in that it inevitably is, you say, presented as a system, then yes, then there's also something to be said in terms of, you could say, the slippery nature of this claim to not have any views. Yeah? So from the Shentong point of view, the fault with both the Svatantrika and Prasangika Madhyamika is that they do not distinguish between the three different kinds of existence, the three different kinds of emptiness, and the three different kinds of absence of essence that corresponds to the three natures, i.e. imaginary, dependent, and perfect existence. Okay, now don't worry too much about that. And we'll go into the details with these, and you thought, oh, isn't it nice? We've just arrived at where there's no assertion whatsoever, and all of a sudden now we're sort of, there's the three this is and the three that. But all we're really talking about is just the way that the mind actually operates in terms of falling into confusion, and in that this mind could rid itself of confusion, there is a path. And that's why, yes, there is this mind that we're dealing with. And so to just say, well, it's not there, and that's of course true, there is no ultimate anything. You could say mind, there's no phenomena and all of that. Great. But we nevertheless have to, and this is also basically what takes place when the Svatantrikas, Svatantrika Madhyamika, they speak about the two truths, is that then there has to be an acknowledgement of the process. And this is then where the Shentong Madhyamikas also, they really make use of the formula that you have in the Yogacarya, which is identifying how this mind can fall into confusion and be free of confusion. There's a path to rid ourselves of confusion. So that's where we talk about these three natures: imaginary nature, dependent nature, and perfect existence. Imaginary nature, basically what we call samsara. Perfect existence, basically what we call enlightenment. And dependent nature, well, that nature that can undergo transformation, that nature which can fall into confusion, and then on the basis of the path, which ultimately can be, you could say, liberated into enlightenment. So this is very real in terms of, you could say, the practice. So yes, all due to respects to all and the thing is also, please don't think that these various tenets, they're set up in terms of, you could say, debating each other. But of course, they work beautifully together, and they all have a role to play. And of course, we speak about them. We don't just say, well, in our school, we're not going to talk about, the two truths or the three natures or anything. We're not going to talk about, the consciousnesses and the subject and object as we have it in the Abhidharma, which is taught by the Sutrantikas, etc. All of it is used. But we are talking about here, then, what do we take with us when we sit down and we meditate? And I'm probably going to repeat this a few times. Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye, he made a point that the Rangtong, and essentially what we would associate with the Prasangika Madhyamika, that we really need to have down as the view. Then when we're on the path, then we can embrace the Shentong, the Shentong approach, which, as we will see, is very much about acknowledging the cognitive, what we call the reflexive awareness, or the luminous nature of awareness, the luminous nature of untainted awareness. So that's where there is, you could say, something that is there as something that we identify as what we essentially carry on the path, what we meditate on the path. But that all done with a vision of the Prasangika, the absolute freedom from conceptual constructs. So they work beautifully together. Anyway, so some Shinto masters argue that the Rangtong, what we looked at basically, the Prasangikas, those who would say everything is empty, including also Buddha nature. Of course, in a way, nobody's really arguing with that, except, well, there's something to be said about that. And that's where some Shinto masters argue that Rangtong Madhyamaka teaches only the first kind of emptiness. In other words, the emptiness of the imaginary nature, which is simply its complete non-existence. They argue that if this kind of emptiness were the absolute reality, or mere absence of conceptual contrivance were absolute reality, it would be a mere nothingness, empty space. So that's where they essentially, there's not so much that they could say this person or that person got wrong, but there's just a tendency that it could lead to an understanding that is very, you could say, void. So the argument runs along the lines of how can mere nothingness account for the manifestations of samsara and nirvana? They vividly appear as impure and pure manifestations, respectively. Mere emptiness does not account for this. There has to be some element that is, in some sense, luminous, illuminating, knowing. This is then the scope of then the Shentong Madhyamaka. That is where that quality of the element that is luminous, illuminating, knowing, and so on, that it can fall into this luminous quality. It can fall into, when there's ignorance, it falls into the situation of samsara. That is where the force of this nature, say the creative force of this luminous nature, this creative force, when it's filtered through confusion, it manifests as the six realms, or you could say samsara. When it's no longer filtered through confusion, then it manifests as all the qualities of enlightenment. So it's simply just, you could say, like when the light comes through a crystal, if the crystal is not polished, yeah, then it's dimmed, and we only have some sort of, half colors, compared to if it's clean, then there's pure colors that come through. So that's where the dim version of the luminous nature is samsara, and the untainted, clear nature of this luminosity are all the qualities of enlightenment. What cleanses it is then the recognition of shunyata, emptiness. So, because Shentongpas makes the same distinction between the three natures as the Chittamatrans do, and because they stress the true existence of the luminous knowing aspect of mind, many Rangtong masters have confused it with Chittamatra. And that is where we've had a little bit of bickering here and there. But we needn't worry about that, and it's really just about us practicing. And in this case, I think everybody is pretty comfortable with understanding that when we talk about emptiness, it is really to dismantle our confusion. This allows for a luminous quality of untainted awareness to manifest in this. Basically, we make this the nature of what we are familiarizing ourselves with, meditating on. Through all the various do this, ways we integrate this in the Vajrayana, through, for example, the four empowerments, through sadhana, yoga practice, Dzogchen, and Mahamudra. However, there are very important differences between Chittamatra and Shentong. So this is where some would say, oh yeah, you're Shentongpas, you're no different from Chittamatras. But there is some difference. Firstly, Shentongpas, and remember Shentongpas, they are Madhyamikans, yeah? They do not accept the Chittamatra view that consciousness, vijnana, is truly existent. They hold the Madhyamika view that is non-arising and without self-nature. They consider themselves to be great Madhyamikas because their system involves not only recognizing freedom from all conceptual contrivance, what we call nishprapancha or tredra, but also the realization of the wisdom mind, jnana, that is free from all conceptual contrivance. So it's not just this freedom from conceptual constructs. Of course, this is the foundation, really, but they also recognize that within this nature, there is this luminous quality of spontaneous awareness, self-arisen awareness, rangjongyi yeshe, Rigpa, or yeah, wisdom, Yeshe, Jnana. So this realization, wisdom mind, the complete realization of non-duality, this is of course also free from any conceptual constructs, but it has this, we are identifying this luminous nature. This non-conceptual wisdom mind is not the object of the conceptualizing process. So it is not negated by Madhyamaka reasoning. Madhyamaka reasoning is what shows that nothing has ever really come into existence. And so as far as wisdom mind goes, absolutely, the Shentonpas, they're absolutely fine with that too. Because this mind, this wisdom mind, is not something, something that falls into the category of that which is, you could say, dependently arisen, or in any way a construct. Therefore, it can be said to be the only thing that has absolute and true existence, and that's where the Ramtongpa then they then object. They're saying, if you're saying something has true existence, it can't function and so forth. But that's not really what we're saying, because it is really saying, with regards to say the unconfused samsaric, the unconfused enlightened phenomenon. That, of course, doesn't fall into the ordinary you could say, category of that which we refute with Madhyamaka reasoning. It is important to understand that this true existence does not mean that it is the object of conceptualization. If it were even the most subtle object of the conceptual process, it would be refuted by prasangika reasoning. This non-conceptual wisdom mind is not something that even supreme wisdom, prajna, can take as its object. Anything that can be an object of consciousness, however pure and refined, is dependently arisen and has no true existence. And that's why I'm saying this wisdom is beyond anything that can be an object of consciousness. So what is this non-conceptual wisdom mind? It is something that one realizes through means other than the conceptual process. So this is where the Vajrayana is very profound, because it really starts at a place of understanding the role of this non-conceptual wisdom mind, and it employs skillful means that are not particularly conceptual. It includes conceptual methods, but conceptual methods that take us beyond the conceptual. So it says one experiences, referring to the wisdom mind, directly just as it is, and any conceptual fabrication obscures it. All the teachings of Mahamudra and Mahāti, meaning Dzogchen, and the whole of the Tantras are about this non-conceptual wisdom mind, the means of realizing it. For this realization, a guru is absolutely necessary. The guru's realization and the disciple's devotion and openness of mind have to meet in such a way that the disciple can experience that non-conceptual wisdom mind directly. And this is where we would famously say, to think that we could realize co-emergent wisdom without accumulation of merit, the purification of obscurations, and the blessing of authentic guru, to think that we could realize the co-emergent wisdom without these would be absolutely foolish. And that's where the guidance of a guru is absolutely necessary, because we're engaging, we're being led to experience something that is beyond anything we can know as an object of knowledge. So it's vastly different from anything that we ordinarily understand in terms of knowledge, in terms of, you could say, data, and you could say knowledge that we can assimilate as objects of the mind. And so that's where the non-conceptual, the indescribable, inconceivable qualities of the guru is not, of course, you could say, it can be appreciated and put into words by the students, but really what really is the quality of the devotion is that it's this sensitivity to the greatness of the guru, the greatness of the guru's wisdom, in which the student is humble, yet also interested, and also understands that this is something that you could say is shared a shared property of the guru and the student. And yet the student doesn't have the means to properly recognize it. And they lacks the skill in integrating it. And that's where the guru is essential. But if there is this openness and this sensitivity, then the nature of this indescribable wisdom can enter. And this is then what we call blessing. And it's on the basis of that, then the disciple can experience non-conceptual wisdom mind directly. And this is of course the scope of Guru Yoga. So everything that we do in terms of the Vajrayana needs to first have establish the essential conditions for the general path, which are the first sections of the Ngöndro, and then particularly the culmination of the Ngöndro or preliminary practices consists of the Guru Yoga, in which then this situation of devotion and the presence of the teacher's blessing facilitates then this insight, which we can maybe refer to tentatively as the co-emergent wisdom that then becomes the foundation for the Vajrayana journey, the practice of the four empowerments, and so on. So it says, from then on, the disciple uses that experience as the basis of his or her practice, nurturing and fostering it until it becomes clear and stable. Only then can the final, full, and perfect realization occur. From the Shenton point of view, what the Chittamatrins call absolute, i.e. the experience of the self-knowing, self-illuminating awareness, what's sometimes referred to as reflexive awareness. From the Shenton point of view, the way that the Chittamatrins refer to that is then wrongly interpreted by them to be a consciousness. So that's where we then have this critique of the Chittamatrins, that they actually take this wisdom and they turn it into an object. Shenton, however, say that although it is true that when the mind rests in emptiness without conceptual contrivance, which is what all Mahayanists claim to do, one does experience the clear luminosity and aware quality of the mind. This is not a consciousness, vijnana. Vijnana means a divided consciousness. Yeah? Nam she in Tibetan, okay? In Dharma language. It's nam par shepa, to know something. The thing is nam, nampa, something, an object. And shepa is to know. So implicitly, the idea of consciousness is that there's a duality. I'm just thinking in English. I think what was it? When we say concept, I think it means that we are conceiving of something. I think there's actually a subject-object implication when we say concept. I think it might be, but anyway, that's the problem with the vijnana, and that's the problem with interpreting then wisdom as something. Vijnana means a divided consciousness. In other words, divided into a seeing and seen aspect. Shentonpas take it as a fact that a mind bounded by concepts of time and space must in some sense entertain the concepts of moments having durations and atoms with extensions in space. Well, as we've seen, that's not going to get accepted, right? Furthermore, so that's where the Shentonpas, they take issue with that, you can say, interpretation of luminosity that the Chittamatrins have. Anyway, furthermore, it will always seem that for an instant of knowing to take place, knowing and a known aspect of consciousness must arise, even if it's understood that they have no ultimate or real existence. So that's where, yes, there is, of course, this sense of knowing. But then again, there's a big difference whether we think that is absolute or we just understand it as something that is there, you could say it's phenomenology, but doesn't have some ultimate ontological status or some absolute reality. Yeah? Now, please, don't think of this as philosophy. This is about experience. So everything we're talking about here is, you could say, the scope of meditation. So it's about knowing what's going on in our mind. So you could say, having if we're planting a garden or if we're gardening, it's very helpful to look in a manual on gardening. First of all, it's helpful at the beginning to give us some idea what we do, and then once we've actually planting and with growing a garden, to continually refer back to the manual has nothing to do with philosophy. It's not theoretical. So that's where, please, if anybody ever hears anybody saying that this stuff is philosophy, please, we do sometimes by language end up referring to this as Buddhist philosophy. But it's no more philosophy than a garden manual. It's no more philosophy than a book of recipes. It's about doing something, and those that practice meditation, this manual has nothing to do with theory. It has everything to do with what actually we are experiencing. So there's not some component of theory in this. It's entirely about what we're doing. But it's also important then that we don't, if we just see this as philosophy, then of course it's boring. Then we're never going to actually, you could say, integrate what's being told here. So if we just say, well, there's a garden manual, but I don't really want to know it, and I just want to go and do my garden my own way, we actually fail to pick up there's somebody who really knows about gardening, and they actually have written a book on how to do it. If we just think, oh, well, I'm just gardening, how hard can it be? Just plant some seeds in the ground, and yeah, fair enough, sure, by all means. But there's just ways in which the lineage has succeeded in, you could say, giving rise to this wonderful harvest of enlightenment that could be interesting for us to, hear what they have to say. And when we're talking about, if we're already beginning to garden a little bit, then everything that's said in there makes perfect sense. So just to really sort of drive a big 7-inch nail through this sort of myth that studying these things is philosophy or theory. It's not. It's as much theory as a recipe book or a gardening book. You have to do it, but good to know how to. And definitely on the journey, it will stimulate, clarify, and enhance what we're getting on with. So then the Khenpo says, Shentonpas regard the concepts of a stream of consciousness, consisting of moments having knowing and known aspect, as a misunderstanding of reality. So that's, again, pretty much what we're about. We're eliminating misunderstandings about reality. It's not strange that we misunderstand appearances. We get fooled by appearances, but we'd like to go beyond that. So it is a false or deceptive reality or truth. In fact, the term relative truth we have been using throughout this text is a translation of the Sanskrit word samriddhi, which means covered or concealed. The Tibetan translation kunsop means dressed up or blown up to give false appearance. Kunsop means masked, it's masquerade really. Kunsop means something that covers everything. One could say samriddhi is mere concealment or merely apparently true. So of course it's true that, let's say, this particular person is my boss, but then it's somebody else's spouse, and it's somebody else's father, and somebody else's son. So yes, it's perfectly true that this is my boss, but it's not in the absolute sense. From the relative sense, yes, but this person in no way is inherently boss. That's just from my particular view, etc. So it says it is only relatively true in the sense that things seem to be that way to ordinary beings. So that's why we fall for appearances. There's this appearance, this reflection, this appearance, and we then think that has an identity, an unchanging quality. That's why we also need to be a little bit humbly aware of. We actually attribute absolute qualities or absolute truth to things. We are people who label things mistakenly. We mistake reality and attribute absolute truth to things that are merely just relative perceptions, merely just appearances. That's why when we talk about refutation, the establishing of emptiness, we actually need to acknowledge that we actually are stuck with our particular mistaken kind of absolute truth. And we're attributing some solidity that's not there. And so ultimately, regarding these phenomena, then they are not, or it is not true at all. From the Shentong point of view, the luminous, self-aware, non-conceptual mind that is experienced in meditation, when the mind is completely free from concepts, is absolute reality. It is not vijnana. Vijnana is always samriddhi, kunzo, from the Shenton point of view, and is not what is found by the supreme wisdom, prajna, that sees absolute reality. When this luminous, self-aware, non-conceptual mind, that is the wisdom mind, jnana, is realized by the supreme wisdom, prajna, there is no seeing and seen aspect, no realizing and realized aspects to realization. So what we're doing on the path is cultivating this prajna that eliminates confusion, and it is what takes us then to recognition of this non-dual absolute nature. So this, the Khenpo then says, this is called the transcendence of supreme wisdom, prajna paramita. It is none other than the conceptual wisdom mind itself. It is also called the non-dual wisdom mind, jnana, the clear light, prabhashvara, nature of mind and dhatu, space, expanse, or element. Elsewhere it is called the element, dhatu or yin, sometimes absolute space. And we talk here about this element and awareness inseparable, space and awareness inseparable. Yeah, yin dang rikpa, clarity and emptiness inseparable. Salwa and Tongpa, bliss and emptiness inseparable. Dewa and Tongpa. So we very often see these. We very often, when we look at particular teachings, they'll emphasize this, you can say, insight into what we call space and awareness. Here it's called element and awareness, inseparable. And when you look across various, particularly in sadhana and so forth, it'll talk about clarity and emptiness inseparable, or empty luminosity, or empty clarity, and so on. Or we'll talk about bliss and emptiness inseparable, like empty bliss, or also appearance and emptiness, and so forth. So this nature is essentially that which is the scope of the paramita, this absolute nature. So we mentioned that from the very start in Tantra, this becomes part of our vocabulary, really about what is real. So the Shenton view is very much part of, you could say, basic to the entire approach that we have in sadhana, but also in practices of yoga and in practices of Dzogchen and Mahamudra. So this is also called Amata and the Tathagata Gaba. Shentonpas contend that the experience of complete freedom from conceptual contrivance, nishprapancha, and in the Tibetan then Trita, must also be the experience of the clear light nature of mind. So this is essentially the ground, the ground that we uncover and which we engage as the path. In their opinion, a prasangika who denies this must still have some subtle concepts which is obscuring and negating this reality. In other words, such a person has not truly realized complete freedom from conceptual contrivance. And that is then where, if we end up having a place where we say, oh yeah, Buddha nature, that's just the freedom from conceptual, the freedom is just this emptiness, and basically what we call non-affirming emptiness, which is really just say there's nothing. Then there's clearly a little bit of a concept that's still blocking this. So that's why we will say this so-called non-affirmative negation that we have sometimes because it's not natural, because that in it, you can say non-affirmative negation is very good an antidote to say, yeah, things don't have true existence. That's very important. But there's something that once that is, you can say, we let go of that, then there's all the qualities, the luminosity that recognizes that. And to just get stuck with the idea of emptiness, that is then a cognitive obscuration. Then there is this, what Khenpo says here, a subtle concept that's getting in the way. So the Khenpo says this happens because for a long time the meditator has been cutting through illusion and seeing emptiness as a kind of negation. This becomes very, you can say, pronounced, and this becomes the part of the path when you practice repeatedly what we call analytical meditation. just continually saying, oh, I'm not finding anything, there's nothing there, analyze phenomena, they have no true inherent existence. And that's all very good, but at one point the meditator then needs to let go of even this concept of emptiness. Otherwise, it just sits there as another subtle concept. So this becomes such a strong habit that even when the experience of absolute reality, the clear light nature of mind, starts to break through, like the sun from behind clouds, meditators automatically turn their mind toward it to subtly negate it. And that's where we're unnecessarily applying an antidote. That's where there is this quality that's luminous and so forth, but to then again begin to continue this analysis is unnecessary. Shentong was argued that if there really were no conceptual contrivance in the mind, that the clear light nature would shine forth so clearly, unmistakably, that it would not be possible to deny it. So that's where they would say, look, you're subscribing to non-conceptual contrivance. Well, there it is. Please don't deny it. So that's where they would say, essentially, leave the mind. At this point, cut the analysis. And that's then where we proceed to what we call settling meditation. So there's two ways that we can engage this kind of vipassana, this kind of practice, which is on the basis of analysis and on the basis of settling. And initially, analysis can be very helpful. But at the end of the day, then there has to be the practice of settling. That's again a little bit different according to the different traditions. Some would really emphasize for a long time the analytical process. Some, like Khenpo said earlier here, some really just meditators just need an understanding of what this is and validation of this clear light nature, and then they would proceed to settle in that without going through a very, very extended period of analysis and analysis. The fact that the Rangtong Madhyamika do deny it shows the importance of the third wheel of the doctrine. So that's where the Rangtong Madhyamika is very much stress the second turning of the wheel, which is about really just understanding that phenomena don't have inherent existence. But that's where some Rangtong, they would then just say, well, the second turning of the wheel, that's what really tells us what is true. And the third turning of the wheel, well, that's just something that's been taught, the sort of luminous nature and the teachings on Buddha nature and so on. That's just taught for those that can't handle emptiness. So that's why they actually, they refute this sort of the idea that the Buddha nature is the absolute teaching. What we have in Jamgön Kongtrul tradition, Longchenpa's tradition, and so forth, is really the view that the second and the third turning, they're equally absolute truth. We could say one is ontology, the other is phenomenology. One is the insight into how reality is, and the other is the experience that comes with that insight into reality. So, so the Khenpo says the Buddha is said to have turned the wheel of the doctrine, Dhamma-chakra, 3 times. That is to say, he gave 3 major cycles of teachings. The first correspond to the Shravaka level of meditation on emptiness. So that's what we've looked at here. The second to the Madhyamika Rangtong level, and that's then the teachings on Prajnaparamita and so on. And the third to the Madhyamika Shentong. This is then the teachings on Buddha nature. Each level of teaching remedies the faults in the level below it. The Shentongs must regard the third turning of the wheel of the doctrine as remedying the faults of the second, the Madhyamika Rangtong. Okay, this is the way the Khenpo then. So that's where, for the Khenpo, I think then the third turning really is the pinnacle. And this we also see sometimes endorsed in the writings of Longchenpa. But we sort of generally adopt a rather diplomatic stance here and very often say that the two are equally absolute. In fact, Mipham Rinpoche and Longchenpa in some places, they would say, if you establish one or the other as absolute without acknowledging the other, then they both just become what we call expedient, because they're not the absolute. Anyway, there's just a few of you who I think probably would sort of be familiar with this discussion, but it is significant really that we are endorsing this, you could say, cognitive quality that is not merely the assertion that everything is empty, but also comes with this recognition of the authenticity of this cognitive luminous quality of the knowing mind. The third wheel of the doctrine is explained in detail in the Tathagata Sutras. And these are commented on in the Mahayana Anuttara Tantra Shastra, also the Ratna, what is a Ratna Gotra Vibhaga, and that is basically the Uttara Tantra and the teaching on Buddha nature. In Khenpo Foundation, you have this teaching from Tongse Khenpo Rinpoche you can download that's simply just called Buddha nature. And that is Tongse Khenpo Rinpoche's teachings on this text, the Uttara Tantra, Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Ratna Gotra Vibhaga, which in the Tibetan tradition is attributed to Maitreya. Here it is taught that Tathagata Garbha pervades all things and that the mind's nature is the clear light. These are two ways of saying the same thing. The classic example given are those of butter in milk, gold in gold ore, sesame oil and sesame seeds. The butter, gold, and sesame oil pervade in the sense that when the milk, gold ore, or sesame seeds are processed, the butter, gold, and sesame oil emerge. That's also the point that's often been made, that unless we practice, then as much as we have Buddha nature, as much as there's sesame oil and sesame seeds, etc., unless we press the sesame seed, unless we churn the butter, and unless we actually purify the gold ore, then the gold, sesame oil, and the butter will not emerge. So that's why the necessity, this is then an example for the need for practice. In the same way, the beings go through a process of purification from which the purified Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, emerges. So that if the true nature, Dharmata, or beings were not the Tathagata Garbha, they could never become Buddhas, in the same way that a rock that does not contain gold could never yield gold, however much it were to be refined. And that's particularly true then in the Vajrayana, where there's the empowerment of us as being Buddhas, an encouragement to realize that we are deity, we are Buddha. That's where, if it wasn't that we had that nature, there would be no point in having empowerment. There would be no point in pursuing the path. And in fact, the entire Buddhist project would be absolutely pointless if it wasn't that intrinsically our confusion is removable. Intrinsically, our nature is without the blemishes and the stains of confusion. So let's see if there's some questions. So is there a mind without? Oh, what does Shentong mean? Shentong means it means empty of something else, and the something else in this case are all the dharmas of samsara. So when we talk about Rangtong, it means everything is empty, even empty of itself. From the Shentong point of view, the nature of reality is empty except the qualities, the luminous qualities of Buddha nature, that which is real. So the Rangtongs, they would say everything is empty, even that reality itself is empty. But the Shentong person would say everything is empty except that which is real. So the Shentong still would assert this Buddha nature as being real. Then someone says, so is there a mind without consciousness? Here we're talking about how the core, the Buddha nature, this luminous clarity, the clear light nature, is something that exists beyond consciousness, because consciousness here is understood as duality. Does wisdom mind not have a duality of the wise and the wise of and wise about? No. So that's where the wise of and so on, that only exists at the level of prajna. That's still at the level of, you could say, discerning. That's what we say a wise person probably would still have that thought, oh, I'm pretty wise, I'm not mistaken here. Whereas the wisdom itself doesn't have that self-consciousness. There's not a notion of being wise about something. Everything comes from the mind. Okay, I think we can all agree that appearances, nangwa, comes from our mind, but perceived objects, the phenomenal objects themselves, nangyul, may not come from our mind. Or do they also come from our mind? I think Longchenpa said that deluded beings thinks everything comes from the mind. So I'm quite confused now. Thank you. Yeah, we would say even nangyul, that also is constructed by the mind. Anything that we analyze, we basically would say nothing can withstand analysis, even the appearing object. So there's the mind that constructs it in a particular way. But there's also what we call then, so we talk about mind constructs a particular label of a phenomenon. Let's say there's a mouse here and this is really just stuff, but I label it, I impute the label mouse onto it. So then we would say, okay, Jakob's imputing this label mouse onto this thing, this aggregation of stuff. But the object, that is really just his projection. So that's where that is his particular perception or appearance. But does the mouse itself exist? And there we say, is there a basis for imputation? And we would say even the basis for imputation, this also is something that we could analyze, and we would also find that it has no absolute existence. And that's where you could say the entire realm of everything that we experience is the creations of the mind. And that's where, so that's generally how we would see this. But there are various ways in which this is constructed, and there's some there's various ways in which you could say the Chittamatra position talks about what is called the false aspectarians and the true aspectarians. And there's these different ways in which you can approach this discussion. But one thing that's and I won't volunteer anything conclusive in regards to that. Your question is, you could say, very good, and it's something that you could say different practitioners or different masters approach in different ways. But at the end of the day, we do say that all our perceptions are relatively constructed by the self, and we would also are constructed by consciousness. But we'd also make a strong point that this doesn't correspond to what in Western philosophy is then known as solipsism. We're not alone in this world, and what we then have with regards to the shared perceptions that we have, then are again that we equally are sharing the same delusion. So the phenomena, they appear, they're there as the creation of our mind, and others will see the same objects. But we would say this is because we have a shared karma, we have a shared perception. So don't be discouraged if you're feeling a little bit confused about that, because then you can try and have a look in the Ornament of the Middle Way by Shantrakshita with Jamgön Mipam's commentary. Then there's a discussion around that. But I must say I'm not confident in representing these views of the false aspectarians and true aspectarians properly. Yeah. Is that jnana here, non-dual wisdom mind, this is same as the Theravada manure to the jhanas, the states of meditation, samadhi? That's completely different. That's actually also spelled differently. Here we're talking about jnana as in the cognitive quality, whereas jhan or jhanas, they are levels of meditation. Recently, Tsongsa Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye has been teaching Jan is really how you pronounce it, but it's spelled Jana, Diana, if you like. And that is then the various levels, what we call samten, samten, dangbo, samten, nipa, the 4 samtens, the 4 levels of jhanas. Yeah. So different. Even saying freedom from sounds dualistic. Yeah. Well, what can we do? We talk about the Madhyamika, or the middle way of words, and the actual middle way. So we're using language, that's for sure. But that's also, you could say, a vehicle for getting somewhere. just finding the sign that says Tatham doesn't mean that that is Tatham. Yeah. Does the Vajrayana rely on Buddha nature, which is the third turning of the wheel? Very much. Very much. You say the Vajrayana is actually the integration of Buddha nature. So yes, that's where Buddha nature is integrated. There's a clear vision, and that's where Buddha nature, the luminous quality, is continually, you say, reasserted in terms of being this unmistaken quality that then is embodied in deity, as far as this subjective, you say, wisdom is concerned, and the field of that wisdom is asserted as mandala. And so the entire, you could say, realm of all our experience never moves from the ground of actual reality. And as such, then we integrate this as, you could say, the unity of appearance and emptiness, that appearances, yet we understand their emptiness. And that's where the Vajrayana then integrates this vision of already spontaneously perfect cognition as deity. And this is then gradually deepened through the Vajrayana journey. So you could say the two last turnings of the wheel, emptiness and luminosity, the second and third turning of the wheel is integrated in Vajrayana through what you could say the luminous aspect is integrated through the appearance aspect of the development stage, and the emptiness aspect is integrated through the completion stage. And from that perspective, then we talk about the inseparability of development stage and completion stage in the Vajrayana. So the Vajrayana, which is the third turning of the wheel? Yeah, that is the third turning of the wheel. Then is this, you could say, the luminous quality of reality. May I know if there's any difference between Nampara Shepa and Shepa? Well, actually, pretty much like you're saying it there. Yeah, both are translated as consciousness in English. That's right. But then again, sometimes for Shepa, we just say knowing. So that's where we could say Nampara Shepa implies that there's an object. Shepa really just implies that there's knowing. But you will find that Shepa is translated as consciousness. Also, may I know the difference between Yeshe and Rigpa? Well, I think we understand Rigpa as, you could say, the knowing, and the actual, it's a more naked cognitive aspect, and Yeshe is then the, you could say, the what arises from that in terms of various aspects of the knowing. So sometimes we talk about, for example, the 5 wisdoms and so forth. Yeah. But just saying, sorry for raising these boring questions. No, they're not at all boring. I would say I'm a little bit feeling it's a little bit above my league. You know, the difference between, I have actually asked that before, and yes, the answer I was given was that Yeshe, you could say, manifests out of Rigpa. But you know, once I get posed these kind of questions about, you know, wisdoms of various degrees and so on, I always feel I'm sort of standing at the top of, you know, the Empire State Building. You know, it's getting a little bit dizzy. I'm getting a little bit sort of a vertigo with some of these things. Anyway, so if we follow Longchen Pad, Songzar Khenpo Rinpoche, so if we follow Long, okay, hold on, sorry, let's say more to that. So if we follow Longchen Pad Songzar, Songzar Khenpo and his tradition, are we Shentong? Not really. It's generally we would actually, interestingly, we would actually refer to it as Rangtong. But you see, we understand Rangtong slightly different from, for example, Tsongkhapa. Tsongkhapa would understand Rangtong very much as what we would just say a non-affirmative negation. And in general, there's various points actually in which the Rangtong is understood differently in different traditions. So we would actually, as followers of these lamas, Longchen, Patsongsa, and so on, we would actually say we're Rangtong, curiously enough, but with a little bit of a, you could say, a strong sympathy towards Shentong. It's like many of those people who are Madhyamikas, they would say, but they have a sort of rather a soft spot for the Yogacharya. So officially Rangtong, but not too heavy on the Shentong either. So objects may appear even if we do not experience them. Don't know about that. Not exactly sure about that. Objects may appear if we do not experience it. Not so sure. Not so sure. Objects are generally that which we do experience. They're known. Yeah. Objects are generally known as, in the Tibetan, object is actually known as shija, the object of knowing. So, yeah, not necessarily, at least. In the Theravadan tradition, do you know if they have Rangtong versus Shentong discussions? I don't think so. But I would say also this is very much a discussion between, you could say, ontology and phenomenology. And there is this place where you assert, you could say, this very absence of inherent existence, and yet you also have this knowing quality. So it's really, you could say in one way or another, they probably have something slightly corresponding to that. I think they do. Some masters say there is no entity there, even if the knowing is not self. But some masters, like Ajahn Chah, say that emptiness is not empty, emptiness is full of virtues, which sounds to me like Buddha nature. Yep. I think it's the inevitable, and it really depends on how you're coming at things. I mean, with all respects to you could say a lot of time has been spent on this, a lot of very, very, very learned persons have very learned things and insightful things to say about that. So sort of just say, oh yeah, one's ontology, the other's phenomenology. I feel a little bit shy to say that, but I can't help walking away with that angle myself. That's how I make sense of it, so to speak, on a personal level. May I take note like the following? Rangtong parallels the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and Shentong parallels the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. We can say like that as a working thesis, yeah. But we could also say that the Rangtong is implicit in the third turning. But yeah, for the time being, that's all right. Are deities natural aspects of the mind consistent across various people's experience of them, or are they concepts or something else? No, just in the Buddhist context, deity is really that which is sublime. So it's Buddha nature. It's the clear light nature. We integrate it on the basis of, you could say, the way that it manifests in the Sambhogakaya in terms of the subtle aspects of form with deity as a deity and so on. But it is essentially, the way that we integrate it, particularly in the Nyingma tradition, we understand this as the pure nature of reality. It's the pure nature of us, and it's also the pure nature of everything we perceive. So particularly then in what we call Mahayoga, we talk about the Mahayoga Tantra, which is that which establishes all appearances as divine. And this is again the scope of texts like the Guhyagarbha Tantra, where we understand that because phenomena never move from the original ground, they're intrinsically pure. And so everything that we have and can experience, which presently is filtered through the confused ordinary mind, this luminous quality in and of itself never moves from the mind. Reality never moves from the mind, even though we distort it. And the undistorted reality is then what we refer to as the infinite purity of all phenomena, where all phenomena really arise as deity. And that's the scope of this view on deity, and it really runs as the foundation. It really becomes the foundation of understanding the subtle yoga that culminates in the great perfection. And so it is really this understanding is really ground of what we call the inner tantras in the Nyingma tradition. Which Lama tradition is Shentong? Well, Jamgön Kongtrul, that's famously Shentong. But then again, hey, Jamgön Kongtrul was friends with a lot of Rangtong, but so it doesn't really. It's while there has been some bickering, like I say here, we're pretty much at ease with both of these approaches. Yeah, who is Shentong? A lot of, yeah, Shentong, well, Dolpopa, Sherab Gyaltsen, the Jonangpas, Jamgön Kongtrul, and many masters, Shakya Chogden in the Sakya tradition. Many masters were in the Nyingma Kaje would be Shentong, but also Rangtong, and also some Sakya masters would be Shentong. There might even been some Gilu. I don't know. Somebody called Jankya Ronpe Dorje might have been Shentong, but I'm not sure. Put it another way. Is it not possible that there are arising that are not karmically connected to one, i.e. outside of one's field of experience? Not so sure. I don't think so. Whatever there is essentially there on the basis of our knowing. So, yes, is it not possible there are arisings that are not karmically connected to one, i.e. outside one's feeling experience? This is the old question of it, does a tree in an empty forest make a sound when it falls, that sort of thing. Yeah? Not so sure. So I think tentatively we would actually say no. I'm tentatively saying no. Yeah, everything is connected to our experience. We might have shared experience, but essentially all experiences takes place constructed by and generated by the mind. Yeah. All right. I hope this is helpful. I hope this doesn't create too much, you could say, intellectual speculation, but it is really intended on the relative level to highlight the central role of our mind, and to, on the ultimate level, really understand that that as far as our reality actually goes, it cannot be grasped. It's not graspable. When it is grasped, it is samsara. When through the practice of the path we free ourselves from this grasping, then it is enlightenment. And then from that comes the enlightened qualities. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for voyaging along this I think important let's say inquiry. And like I say, let's make sure this doesn't become just theory. We're looking at, as much as we're touching on the dizzying heights, we're also really exploring how, yes, we're growing a garden, and we could actually grow amazing things in this garden. We could we could really do something very, very wonderful. Yeah. Okay. I think I forgot the dedication. Just a sec. Ginger. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. So we'll just take a few minutes break, and then I'll just say, today I'm going to say something about meditation quite briefly, and then we'll just go ahead and do a bit of practice. And then we'll finish early because it's Gurumpa Day, and some people will be doing SOC. There's an online SOC that begins at 7, but there's a bit of preparation prior to SOC. So we'll probably finish a bit early today. Thank you very much. So, a few minute break. Thank you. So a little bit about the practice of meditation. I was tempted to just look at a text by Gyamtso Rinpoche known as Maha'ati. And this was actually taught by Rinpoche to one of his students in England, Rigton Shikbo, formerly, what is it again? Hookham. Something Hookham. Peter John. Can't remember exactly. But anyway. It was circulated very much in the early days as really an instruction intended for people who came to the path and who would like to have an idea of the nature of what we're doing on the path. So it was very much, even though it had the name Maha'ati, which sort of implies Dzogchen, it was very much viewed as something, a teaching that anybody could approach and really get, because they benefit from it. But it does actually have very real references to the view of then Dzogchen, but it was very much the sense that this gave a good idea of what we're doing here. I personally found it very helpful. At one point, actually, it went on this, and somehow because, what was it again? Chime Rinpoche in England, he put it in a magazine where he had a picture of Trungpa of Dilgu Khenpo Rinpoche that accompanied the article. And so then at one point, and it's still to this day on the internet, it says a teaching by Dilgu Khenpo Rinpoche, which is not. Anybody who reads the text will right away recognize the typical vocabulary of Chogyam Trungpa. But anyway, this is quite a helpful text, but I don't think I want to do it right now, even though I was thinking, nice to have something from great masters, like I think a few times ago we had from Dujam Rinpoche. But look, what we're proposing in terms of the material we've just been studying is very much the understanding that the mind itself, when we look at the mind, as much as we can't find anything that's tangible about it, there is a cognitive quality which is not necessarily tangled up in confusion. And what we do with meditation is essentially allow confusion to dissipate and allow a quality of clear cognition, unconfused cognition to emerge and to have some sense of settling into that. It is very helpful to have made some clear, to clearly establish, to be clear on the nature of everything we perceive as empty. And that's quite a lot of, because we are so held by our own thoughts and by our perceptions. There's a lot of, you could say, time, and a lot of words have been allocated to making this point. This is very much the subject of the many teachings in Buddhism. But once that is in place, there's also a lot of trust in already in what we naturally possess in terms of our own mind. So while we are very clearly eliminating confusion, and we can put a lot of, you can say, we can identify a lot of how this confusion manifests, there's very much a trust in that nature which is not corrupted. And so that's where we practice settling the mind, and we come to appreciate how this is really where we're touching reality. And it's necessary for us to understand how, when we're not clear, and when we are entangled in our confusion, we are entangling ourselves in destructive patterns and what is not real. So there has to be a profound understanding of the value of meditation as something that connects us with what is real and is an insurance against our entanglement in confusion. But it comes with very much a trust in our already existing sanity and the insight that this sanity can be engaged. So that's what we do in terms of just the meditation here. We first invoke the Buddha. We invoke the embodiment of what we possess innately, but which because we fail to recognize this, we can appreciate how it's manifested in this world as the Buddha and as the various masters down through the time who have taught and shown the way to recognize this. So that's where invoking the Buddha, invoking the lineage, makes for a vehicle for us who personally might not recognize enlightenment as innate to us. It gives us an understanding how enlightenment manifests, and it also enables us to connect with enlightenment at a time where we, you would say, are shy to recognize it within ourselves, then at least to recognize it as externally manifest. But we do this with not just a clinical appreciation of the Buddha, but very much with a heartfelt openness, this interested humility that is devotion, surrendering, and complete appreciation. And that's where we need to take, you could say, the cue from the ways in which we in the world, when we appreciate something deeply, there is very much, on one hand, you could say, a body language that facilitates this kind of openness. We bow, we practice with Anjali Mudra, but also from within, we can see how the more we have openness, appreciation, love, awe, when we have these qualities, then something can transpire, something can take place, and that's where we say transmission then and blessing takes place on the basis of this interested humility, devotion. So that's where the language is accordingly. We visualize, we take refuge, visualize the Buddha, and offer what we call the 7 limbs of puja, or the 7 branches. Then invoking the Buddha with both some short supplications and also the Dharani. We then proceed meditation with this, and then when we settle in meditation, then we settle into a place where first we consider that then the Buddha essentially with the light of wisdom washes away and dispels all our obscurations and essentially enables us to just settle into what is real. And we then practically do that with the practice of meditation. And that's where, as we're doing that, to not get entangled in our ordinary concepts and so forth, we continually just come back to the non-conceptual simplicity of awareness of the breath. This slows us down. This enables us to connect to being present. It's the antidote from essentially floating around in distraction, being absorbed in distraction. And it also enables us to get out of the ordinary grip of our narratives and distracted storylines, our ruminations, and so on. So it connects us with being present, and in that it breaks then this self-absorption. It is what facilitates vipassana, a greater outlook, a greater inclusive experience that goes beyond just the fixating on ourselves. It expands us. It enables us to break through the ordinary absorption in our thinking. So that's why it's very helpful if we have, like previously already established, how the conceptual constructs that we are so fixated on actually are profoundly mistaken, and there's a greater willingness then to let go of these. So that's what so when we're meditating, we have the skillful means of sitting. Sometimes that's where we come back to our breath as a non-conceptual reference point, or when we do walking meditation, we have the footstep as a non-conceptual reference point. And then as we're sitting then and focusing on the breath or on then the attention goes with the breath and out, and simply just then allowing a gap. Familiarizing ourselves with this gap, we then are able to, as thoughts, more and more just be able to experience gap and not necessarily get entangled in the thoughts. We're not suppressing them, we're not kicking them away or trying to avoid them, but we're just allowing them to really take place in a realistic space. We see them from what they are. Very often thoughts and concerns and worries, they sort of just completely take up the whole space, the whole scenery, and they dominate us. And that's where we lose our freedom, we lose our sanity, and more particularly, we become very ineffective. We become very insensitive to solutions. And that's where we just continue perpetuating a experience of anguish around what we perceive as problems. And so to see things from an aerial perspective enables us to be more effective, more achieve what it is we actually wish. And it is what also enables us to be more sensitive to the goodness in the world and the goodness in ourselves and the goodness also in others. So so today, because it's Gurumji Day, I think we'll do the practice now, starting slightly early, and then also we'll simply just do 15 minutes of meditation, and then we'll conclude. So I think we'll just start without further ado. And like I say, then those who are doing Tsok, they then have a chance to join the Tsok practice. This is a child of Sanjay Dorje. He passed away a few years ago. I think many of you have heard of him. Very great Nyingma. This is taken when he was young. But he was somebody who, such a beautiful picture, isn't it? Try and look at that gentleness and yet complete clarity. He was a very great master. Lived to be 102, vegetarian for most of his life, and very greatly respected man. But even in his young days, he was actually sort of, even though he didn't have he wasn't a tugu, he wasn't particularly a rinpoche or any kind. He was recognized by many masters as really an extraordinary great being. Anyway, he spent most of his life in retreat, but then, as far as I knew him, then for the last 30 years, then he was, continually helping beings. And he was very big on actually liberating animals. He would pretty much all offerings that came his way, if they weren't, because they earmarked for other particular purposes, they would all go to animal release. And he actually would he went to Calcutta annually for a number of years and would buy an enormous amount of fish and then actually take them back where they came from. So he was very famous for his animal release. Okay. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness in the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lined throne and lotus sun and moon their seats, the incomparable teacher, Lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the three Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. Your great compassion, you embrace this turbulent and degenerate world, and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues, body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I'm accumulating now and will accumulate in the future. For the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance, no protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Teyatao muni muni mahamunaya soha. 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 Teyado muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om 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 muni muni mahamunaya soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations, and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. And then today we'll just go to the final concluding prayers. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be. And where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyaha jagaduga nata akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyaha jagaduga nata tavan mama stiti bhuyaha Jagadugani nata tavam mama stiti bhuyahat Jagadugani nata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. So thank you very much for joining me here for this study, and see you again soon, hopefully. All the very best. Take care.